Picture your ancestors standing in the open African sun, roughly 1 million years ago. No fur, no fabric, no leather wraps slung over the shoulder, just bare skin, facing down the exact same sun, wind, insects, and cold nights that would put you in a hospital within days. And somehow, this went on for hundreds of thousands of years, before anyone invented a single piece of clothing. This is the story of the gap nobody talks about, the enormous stretch of time when humans were naked, hairless, and completely on their own. Let's start with the timeline because it's genuinely more shocking than people assume. Genetic studies of skin pigmentation suggest our ancestors lost most of their body fur, somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago. But the oldest solid genetic evidence for clothing, based on when human body lice, the specific species that lives exclusively in fabric rather than hair, split off from head lice, points to somewhere between 80,000 and 170,000 years ago. Do the math on that gap. That leaves well over 1 million years, where humans had already lost their fur, but hadn't yet invented anything to replace it. A naked, hairless primate, walking around for longer than clothing has existed at all. So how did anyone survive that? The first answer is simpler than you'd expect. Geography did most of the work. This entire naked period played out primarily in equatorial and subequatorial Africa, a climate where losing your fur in the first place made total sense. Remember, our ancestors shed hair specifically to cool down more efficiently while hunting under a brutal sun. Nakedness wasn't a crisis in that environment. It was, if anything, the natural continuation of the same adaptation. Warm days, mild nights, no snow, no freezing wind. The environment simply didn't punish bare skin the way it would almost anywhere else on Earth. But it wasn't just luck of geography. The body itself adapted with its own built-in technology, replacing fur with something arguably better suited to that climate. Dark skin, rich in melanin, functioned as a permanent self-renewing sunscreen, protecting against UV damage that pale, exposed skin would have suffered constantly. So while our ancestors had no clothing whatsoever, they were walking around with a biological solution to the single biggest threat that nakedness in a sunny climate actually creates: sunburn and skin cancer risk, largely neutralized, before a single stitch of clothing ever existed. Nighttime is where things get trickier, because even in Africa, temperatures can drop noticeably after dark, and a naked body loses heat fast without insulation. This is where behavior, not biology, filled the gap. Fire, already controlled by hominins for roughly 1 million years by this point, meant groups could huddle close to flames overnight instead of relying on fur they no longer had. Shelter mattered too: caves, rock overhangs, simple constructed windbreaks, anything that blocked wind chill and trapped a little warmth. And there's a strong argument that loose animal hides were used long before anyone actually wore clothing in the way we'd recognize it. Simply draping a fresh skin over your shoulders while sleeping near the fire, using it as a blanket rather than a garment, requires zero sewing, zero tailoring, and zero technology, beyond killing an animal and picking up the hide. That's not clothing yet. That's the missing link between naked and dressed. Which brings us to the real turning point in this story. And it has almost nothing to do with staying warm in Africa. It has to do with leaving it. Somewhere between 100,000 and 70,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began migrating north, out of the tropical climate that had made nakedness survivable, and into environments that absolutely did not forgive bare skin. Ice Age Europe, Central Asia, places where a naked human, however dark-skinned and however well adapted to sun exposure, would freeze to death within hours. This is almost certainly the pressure that forced clothing from a loose, casual hide blanket into something genuinely engineered, fitted, sewn, wine-resistant garments built to trap body heat against a hostile climate. And we can actually see this technological leap happen in the archaeological record, thanks to one small, almost overlooked object: the sewing needle. The oldest confirmed dyed sewing needles, tools specifically designed to pull thread, through hide and stitch pieces together into fitted shapes, date back roughly 40 to 60,000 years, found at sites in Siberia and elsewhere across northern Eurasia. That's a needle, purpose-built for tailoring, not a wrap, not a blanket. Actual constructed clothing cut and sewn to fit a human body and seal out cold air. Here's the genuinely fascinating complication, and it might explain one of the biggest mysteries in human evolution. Neanderthals lived in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, in brutally cold conditions, and archaeologists have found remarkably few sewing needles at Neanderthal sites. Compared to the sites left behind by Homo sapiens, moving into the same regions. Some researchers argue this suggests Neanderthals likely relied on simpler, draped, unfitted hides, similar to that early African blanket-style solution, rather than the tightly sewn, layered, wind-sealed garments Homo sapiens eventually developed. If true, that gap in tailoring technology, something as small and unglamorous as a needle, may have been one of the genuine advantages that let our species outcompete a physically tougher, cold-adapted relative in the exact same brutal environment. So the next time you zip up a jacket without a second thought, understand the scale of what you're actually doing. You're deploying a piece of technology so effective, it may have helped decide which species of human made it out of the last ice age, and which one didn't. Your ancestors spent well over 1 million years walking around bare-skinned, protected by nothing but dark pigment, fire, and whatever hide happened to be lying nearby. The jacket came later, much later, and when it finally arrived, it may have changed everything,